The NBA playoffs are still going on right now, but soon they'll be over and the offseason will be here, and it'll be time a lot of teams make a lot of adjustments because we've learned this past season and we're still learning during these playoffs that a lot of changes need to be made. Like the most recent, Ben Simmons has got to get out of Philly. Dude's just lost to the Hawks and he was the main reason why. He's got a $170 million contract and averaged 10 points a game. He didn't even go up against any great defenders. He's big and quick, but he's not a star. And I'm not saying he needs to get traded because maybe he'll do better on another team. I just think for Philly's sake, they need to try and convince someone else to make him their problem. Teams to consider here would be the Toronto Raptors and the Portland Trailblazers and maybe even the Chicago Bulls. They should trade him now to the Raptors though. Sign and trade Kyle Lowry and send him and maybe a young asset to the 76ers. Toronto's losing out on Kyle anyways, so now they get a good player in return that would actually fit well into the new age group this team's headed for. And for Philly, Lowry's the perfect point guard they would have needed to beat the Hawks. If not Toronto though, send him to Portland for CJ McCollum. What Portland's doing is never going to work at the rate as is, and same for the 76ers. Both teams need to change things. It would give Philadelphia a go-to scorer at shooting guard while Seth Curry could transition back to point guard. And for the Blazers, Simmons could play power forward, and they could have a new outlook on their team and some much needed help on the defensive end. Both teams desperately need to do something, and we'll get more into the Trailblazer side of things throughout the video. The other trade though would be one to the Bulls for Zach LaVine. Now this would be the dream scenario for Philly. LaVine's a superstar and would fit right in with their team, but I don't really see Chicago taking this one because they just traded away this year's first round pick to bring in Vucevic. So I don't know if I could see them trading away their best player for a much younger one that won't make the team any better while Nikola's still on the roster. But in my opinion, they should still do it because they're not going to make the playoffs even if LaVine stays, so might as well age down while they can. Also, I just finished coming up with Kemba Walker trades, including one to OKC for Al Horford like 5 minutes before it came out that the trade had actually went down. So the prediction didn't make it in for the video, but I still wanted to go over it. It was one that Celtics fans didn't like, but I mean, I get why they did it. Kemba didn't fit, he's not a real star, he's overpaid, and so is Horford, but his contract runs out sooner, so it's okay. I mean, I guess they could have tried to get someone a little better in return for Kemba, but Horford knows Boston's system, and he actually hasn't been terrible for the Thunder. He's still a solid center. I think he'll be a good fit for the Celtics as long as they can get a good point guard replacement now. One of the other biggest changes that needs to be made and was brought to light by this postseason was that Kristaps Porzingis needs to get traded away from the Dallas Mavericks. I don't know if it was on him, Rick Carlisle, or just the whole team, but he's either just not a star player anymore, or he was one of the most underutilized players in the NBA today. If you saw a Mavericks game at all this season, you would know that he just didn't fit in, and at 7'3", really didn't do anything besides shoot the ball, so he's just got to be traded. And there's more scenarios I can find for him than any other player, but here's just a few. Send Kristaps to the Indiana Pacers for TJ Warren and Myles Turner, who's been in trade talks for years anyways, and a draft pick. For Dallas, it gives them a true center and some much needed defense down low, where Porzingis was supposed to come up big but never did, and also adds more depth with TJ. For the Pacers, it frees up Domantas Sabonis and gets rid of their spacing issues while continuing to keep this team young, making this one of the better and more even trades out there that works for both sides. I also like a trade exchanging Pascal Siakam for Kristaps though. We got a couple more Siakam trades later, but for now, the Toronto Raptors had a terrible season and what was their worst since 2011. Now, Kyle Lowry's leaving the team and next year's looking like it's going to be even worse. And it also didn't help that Siakam took a huge step back either. So maybe it's time to trade the 27-year-old for a 25-year-old Porzingis. For Toronto, it helps them age down and gives them a new opportunity to switch things up with the identity of their team. Besides, Pascal had a lot of frustrations with those in charge last year, so it might just be his time to go anyways. On the other hand, Siakam's a little older to be playing with the 22-year-old Luka, but he was the perfect second option and complement to Kawhi Leonard, so maybe he could be the same for Doncic. Not the perfect scenario, but I thought it was worth a discussion. There were a few other scenarios, but one I'd like to see the most would be sending him to the Portland Trailblazers. I'm a fan of Portland, but this year made it clear that whatever they got going on with their team just isn't it. They need to do something, so maybe trading a deal centered around Robert Covington and Yusuf Nurkic for Kristaps is the way to go. They need to switch things up, and there's still hope that the 7'3" sharpshooter was just in a system that wasn't using him right. And if that's so, the Blazers could get themselves another all-star for a bargain. While Dallas needs a true center and always could use some defense, so both problems are fixed here. And I think we can all agree a Porzingis trade should happen. I don't know if people feel the same way about trading Karl-Anthony Towns though, but I think it's 100% past due. He's gone through so many different iterations of this Timberwolves team, and nothing's worked and they've only gotten worse over time, so he needs to go. A popular trade I've seen recently would be sending him to the New York Knicks. They have valuable draft picks and guys like Mitchell Robinson and RJ Barrett that they could trade if they can get salaries to match. It would would give them D'Angelo Russell, Barrett, Edwards, and Robinson in their starting 5, as well as picks for the future. While obviously for New York, it would team Towns up with Julius Randle in the front court, which wouldn't be the best defensively, but I'm sure the Knicks are going to be ready to make trades in July. So it's still possible. Now, obviously, nothing needs to be done in Atlanta. What they've been doing is amazing, and their team's stacked, but looking towards the future, they might not be able to keep all these guys when their rookie deals are up, so it might be worth looking into trading some of them for a guy like Towns. Probably not a great choice since Towns isn't great defensively, but I thought it was worth bringing up. Now, clearly, I don't have the perfect scenarios for him, but all I'm saying is there's options out there if Minnesota chooses to do so. I'm sure there's more options for D'Angelo Russell too. I don't really want to get into those. I do want to get a little more into the Trailblazers though, like I mentioned earlier. They're getting close to the point where they might have to trade Damian Lillard. He might start to want out eventually with all this losing, but I think before that happens, they need to at least trade CJ McCollum first and see how that works out. So I came up with a couple scenarios for him. I mentioned the Simmons trade earlier, which I'm still really into. One to the Grizzlies could be perfect though in trading CJ, Anthony Simons, and draft picks there in return for Dylan Brooks and Justice Winslow. But I don't think Memphis would really be into this one, seeing how good Brooks has been. It's something Portland should try and pull off though, because they could definitely use his defense next to Lillard. And they need something like this, so if it's not Memphis, look to the Boston Celtics for them to make a trade like this happen, because they could trade CJ in a deal revolving around Marcus Smart. And it could make sense. Boston's already going to have Horford and Jaylen Brown in the starting lineup, so maybe they want to trade Smart out for some more firepower on offense. And if they did, it could really work for both sides. Then I don't see this one as likely. It wouldn't be the best for the Toronto Raptors. For the Trailblazers, it'd be the best case scenario to send CJ to the Raptors and get Pascal Siakam in return. His offense, defense, and ability as a second option is something that would make him thrive in a role next to Dame. But I see Toronto headed for more of a rebuild, so I don't know that I can see them trading Pascal for a nearly 30-year-old player. But speaking of him, I came up with a couple more trades for him that the Raptors might want to look at. There's two scenarios that came in mind, with the first being to send him to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Ricky Rubio, Jared Culver, and 2 of their first-round picks that'll be pretty high up. It helps the Raptors build for their future, gives them a young player with potential, and also a point guard to fill in Lowry's spot until they find a better option. And of course, for the Wolves, they don't have to give up a ton on their active roster, and they get a power forward who almost completes their starting 5, and one that'll really be able to help them on the defensive end of things. So I really like this one, and I think it could be a win-win here. The other Pascal Siakam trade that would work for both sides would be to ship him to the Sacramento Kings in exchange for Marvin Bagley and Buddy Hield, giving the Raptors a young player in Bagley who they could try and change his career trajectory, and Hield who could help them stay as contenders for the playoffs next year. And for the Kings, it finally mix things up and give De'Aaron Fox a little more star power to work with. The Indiana Pacers also really need to finally change things up with their squad, and they can do so by trading Myles Turner. Sabonis has been in talks recently, but they need to try and keep him. He's young, he's a growing star, and they have a ton of assets around him to bring in another star one day. So I came up with a few ideas on how step 1, aka Myles Turner trade, could happen. And I'd want to see him go to the Blazers, Celtics, Knicks, Hornets, or Mavs. All these teams could really use an upgrade at center and on defense. And they'd all be okay with his lack of offense because they have other assets on the team to make up for it. And every team here would be able to make a trade happen. They'd have to give up a good amount to the Pacers, but it'd be worth it to bring in a center like Myles, who doesn't fit in on his team anyways. So no specific scenarios, but there's some ideas for potential suitors. Our last trade of the video though involves James Wiseman and the Golden State Warriors. Now, most every Wiseman trade you find includes Andrew Wiggins, but honestly, I don't think they should trade Wiggins. He stepped into that Andre Iguodala role with how much he stepped up on defense, and that's exactly what their starting lineup needs. They don't need to try and trade him away for something better, but Wiseman's just not ready for the playoffs, let alone to be on a championship contending team next year. So they need to trade him, and luckily I found a trade that actually really works. They should trade Wiseman, Damian Lee, and one of their first round picks this year in exchange for Christian Wood. For the Warriors, Wood's older, he's ready to play, and he'd be the perfect center. They'd give up on the possible bright future of Wiseman, but Christian's already a bright young player. And this trade would even be good for him, because he signed with the Houston Rockets with the intentions of being on a championship, or at least a playoff team. He didn't want to go from a terrible Detroit team to an even worse Rockets team. He wants to contend. And for Houston, it's also good because they get a center who's much younger and fits in much better with the rebuild they desperately need to do, as well as get a draft pick for their future. Wood's talent is just going to get wasted in Houston, so they might as well trade him. I want to hear what you guys think though. Which of these trades did you like the best and which did I miss out on? Comment and let me know, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.